pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, April 12th, 2018. As always, Duane Rollins on the line with myself, Kevin Laramee. Duane, good morning.
Morning.
How you feeling?
I think that my voice is a little better. I think that's I can go up and down again, so that's good.
Without coughing, no, it's amazing. And yes, antibiotics are working pretty good.
Yeah, I swallowed hard food today.
Oh wow, that's like it's been 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I was enjoying my milkshake dinners, but maybe I'll have to get back to like reasonable food again. There's a great milkshake place. It's called Hollywood Cone. It's down on Queen West here in Toronto. They're spectacular milkshakes. They're absolutely they're all kind of weird stuff they put in there. The s'mores one is to die for. But they're $8 for a small and $10 for a large, and that's what I've been doing for my dinners.
You need a mortgage to get the milkshake dinners. Speaking of mortgage and milkshake dinners and difficulty late in the game, I know it's not related, but it doesn't matter. Madrid almost. Juve almost pulled it off, Duane. But at the end, Mr. Ronaldo said no.
Yeah, the karma that was in play for Madrid there was kind of funny for a while because the Madrid fans were quite enjoying Barcelona's collapse the day before. And certainly with moments to go, it looked like they were going to, emulate the same situation. But Madrid had other ideas. Juve's backline, normally very dependable, had other ideas. How the player gets in behind like that at the end to allow him to be fouled, and we can debate whether he's fouled or not if we want, but how he gets in that position is really the fatal flaw that happens in this play. And another spectacular, we went into this round of this second game of a set of games thinking that there wasn't a lot really to watch, and it turns out we had two kind of classics that came down the pipe. Both involving Spanish and Italian teams.
Juve and Roma battled hard, and I think even though Juve fell a bit short and Roma did eliminate Barcelona, we got to tip our hat to both Italian team. The Italian league, with Serie A, we don't talk about it a lot as much because it's not a league that's easy to watch on this side of the pond, and not just that, it was on a decline for the last few years, and we all remember how both Milan club were a lot better at the beginning of the 2011, especially 2011-2012, when AC Milan won the Champions League with Alessandro Nesta, of course. That time period, Serie A was a lot bigger, was more in our public consciousness as footy fans. Now it's gone a bit, not under, of course, but it lowered in quality and more in getting in excitement. It was way the opposite of parity. Like for like a 5-year period, it was Juventus and nobody else, and it felt really like it was a foregone conclusion that Juventus will win the Scudetto. This year it's a bit different, but Napoli, Roma, teams that are not necessarily the main teams in Serie A from the past, have raised their level and are playing great. And we've seen Roma eliminate Barcelona, and Juve almost pulled it off. But for me, it's a different way that Italian team have won. Right? You score 3 goals for Roma at home, and you win. It's surprising. Usually, an Italian win is always 1-2-0. But even Juve, even though they were missing this last one goal, they were so close. Still, it gives me confidence and it gives me hope that Italian club soccer is back, because they're still not at the World Cup this year. At least club soccer in Italy, Serie A, has raised its level.
Yeah, well, certainly Serie A, like you mentioned it, you had that renaissance third part of this decade, but certainly when I first started to watch the sport, it was the league. That was the best players in the world were in Serie A, certainly in the late 80s, early 90s, for sure. And it's
Maradona, right? The Maradona time at Napoli in that time period, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it was the league that people watched, and you kind of, on my satellite dish growing up, we'd get the games. We could only get them in Italian, but we'd find ways, just like we find ways nowadays. It's interesting how that happened. We did different technologies, but
yeah,
you always find the way.
It was an old, how do you call those? An old, not satellite, like a dish. Those big
it was
dishes.
a gigantic dish in my backyard. Yes. That used to go wee across the sky.
Yeah, you're like, man, I lost signal. That's all right. Let's go with the remote outside. Let's try to find the signal again, so we don't pay for cable.
If there's anyone still out there that remembers us, my friends and I, we used to play around with the T satellites. The T satellites were always where you could buy time on them, so you'd like find the weirdest stuff, like guys in Alabama waiting to go on the air, and local Alabama news picking their nose, and Mexican wrestling and weird stuff. It was fun. Anyway, but Serie A, back to that. It's been an interesting decline, and you'd like to see it catch back up. I don't think they're quite still there. You mentioned the gap. It has certainly been Juve, Gap, Napoli, Gap, the rest in the last few years, and the Milan clubs in particular have suffered, and certainly AC Milan is still kind of, you don't quite know what they're doing there, and it's an unfortunate sort of fall from grace from what was a one time very glorious club. But if they can get back up there, if the Milan clubs can get back and challenging the top, it can be, I think, once again, a very compelling league, and a league that has the possibility of closing that gap. You don't want it to turn into another Bundesliga. I know Bundesliga advocates love the league because it's so competitive after three. Yeah. Like 3 to the bottom, it is great, but 1-2 is kind of, year after year. So other than Dortmund when they have their off years once in a while.
Exactly. And I was going to say, you have always Bayern, and then you have Dortmund, and then whatever. But just to finish, though, and go back to the foul and the Ronaldo penalty and the game winner, the series clincher, the semifinal clincher, as much as we agree that, all right, the foul player might have embellished it a bit, doesn't mean there was no foul. And there's one thing you mentioned on Twitter, on your Twitter feed, which you can follow Duane on Twitter about 24th Minute, and myself at Kev Laramee. Yeah, even though embellishment is maybe there, doesn't mean there was no foul to begin with.
No, for sure. Look, I criticize hockey. Get your bingo card out. I'm making a hockey analogy here a lot. But one thing that they do have figured out is that you'll see this in the NHL where a player will get a penalty for tripping and the player will get a penalty for diving at the same time. That happens. And for some reason, a lot of soccer fans don't, maybe it's just the partisanship coming out, that when they see a flop, they get so angry that they refuse to see anything that happened around that, the embellishment, to try and sell it. And look, it's a cultural thing too, because in different parts of the world, that kind of embellishment is rewarded and thought to be a valuable skill to have. And if you're good at tricking the referee, it's thought to be skillful, whereas here in North America, it's thought to be cheating, right? So
yeah, well, there's only one place in the entire world where it's not necessarily accepted, and it's kind of here. If you go anywhere in the world, people don't complain as much as we do. I don't know why. Is it because we're used to watching many different sport, and for some reason our naivete is present in every sport except soccer? Because guess what? Embellishment is part of every single sport out there. Hockey, football, baseball, basketball.
Basketball. To watch the NBA playoffs. Yeah, it's Flop City, right? But exactly. Look, I played competitive sports as a kid, and I was taught how to dive, right? Like, that's not being naive, but nonetheless, we do like to see, sportsmanship to have some role in the game. But that said, to go back to the point that we're making right now, complaints by Juve. Look, the guy shouldn't have been allowed to get in that position anyway. He was fouled. Yes, it was embellished. Penalty was taken. Buffon lost his damn mind. It's an unfortunate way, I heard comparisons to Zidane yesterday, and I mean, it's not quite as extreme, but it's apt. So unfortunate.
And it happened, and it's a shame. And we all heard Buffon talk about earlier this year. I might be playing until I'm 70. Well, the way this season ended, with him not qualifying for the World Cup with Italy, that's a few months ago, but still hurts. And the Champions League, the way it finishes now, and the way the Scudetto is going to finish with Juve being challenged, this might be Buffon's last season.
Yeah, well, and in fact, that could be, there are already sort of whispers that Buffon is not quite the Buffon of the past, that maybe finally the vampire is starting to show his age. And maybe it's time to make a change in goal anyway for Uwe. And he's a guy that, you can't imagine this guy. I'm sure that there are other teams in Serie A that would be happy to have an old Buffon in goal for a while, but could you imagine him not in the black and white strips, right? Or the pink strip that he wears or whatever?
Yeah, well, I couldn't imagine Peter Cech in another strip than the one I'm wearing right now. And guess what? He's played 100 games for that other strip. So, it could happen sometimes when you... Because Juve, as what could be said the top club in Italy, is going to have to make a change eventually, a decision. Be okay, we're going to go buy Donnarumma, and Donnarumma's going to be their goalie for the next 10 years or something similar. So this is going to happen real soon, and then there will be a decision need to be made either by Juve or Buffon, and say, look, do I stay here? Do I want to play? Do I want to continue to play? Am I pulling a Pirlo and going to play in North America? Do I really want to travel that much? Maybe not. Okay, maybe I'll just go play for a Serie B team or a lower table Serie A team or something.
I gotta the right way. He'll sign for Udinese, because then it kind of looks the same anyway. You got the same black and white strip. We're fine then.
You're fine. You're like, okay, this looks similar. I can deal with this.
Yeah, low level Serie A, kind of looks like Juve, so it would work. That would work. Udinese fans will yell at me that they had the black and white first, but we're talking about some very ancient and very petty kind of arguments here.
Yeah, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some rumors, some bits and bytes, some news, and a high-profile player leaving La Liga.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. You like to hear us talk about soccer? You would like to hear us talk about Canadian soccer more? Well, you can do so by becoming a patron, by going to patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network. Take the pledge. Take the deep dive. $2 a month goes a long way. $1 of Solitudes, and you get access to the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcasts every week. And the show will probably be coming out either later today or tomorrow for patrons only, where we talk about Canadian soccer business, we talk about London, Kitchener-Waterloo's possibility in the KNPL, and we talk about what Duane thinks about this league that will see the first day of light next year. Speaking of first day and first ray of light, Atletico Madrid player Fernando Torres has announced that he will be leaving Atletico Madrid, and as it usually is the case over the last few years when a high-profile player leaves Europe, I got two possibilities of destinations, either MLS or China.
Yeah, you maybe throw Australia in there in some cases, but that's kind of a lower level altogether. Look, yeah, certainly when Torres was announced, if this had happened 3 or 4 years ago, when he first left to go back to Atleti, which was the right move for him at the time, I think this is a guy that would have commanded a lot of interest in MLS circles. There was kind of a different era in MLS at that time. They were still kind of emerging from 2.0 to 3.0, whatever you want to label it. So they might add a little more interest in an older DP at that point. His skills were probably a little high. He is a guy that I think would produce in MLS, but the suggestion is, if you look at the chatter around this, is it's much more subdued than usual. I think some of that relates to people that just don't want, they kind of want to really desperately move away from the signing the older guys at the end situation, and don't, even if they still have value to bring. There is a bit of that out there, and I think there's a bit of like this valuation that's going on that sort of look at Torres and go, well, yeah, he could help us here, but he could help us at 1.5 million. And is Torres willing to come over for 1.5 million? Because a lot of these guys, as much as MLS is evolving away from that, I'm not sure the mentality of the agents and the players that are looking at MLS have evolved away from it in the same way. They're still looking at this as a cash cow for them. And they're going to see 1.5 and go, well, why? I could have got that at Athletic to sit in the bench for the next year.
Yeah. and not having to travel all across the country and not having to play in those difficult conditions on a rainy Tuesday night in Portland, which is our equivalent to Stoke, maybe.
On plastic.
On plastic. Yeah, exactly. 1.5 million, that's not enough to play on turf. But when you're looking at Torres, you mentioned the mentality of the agents and the perception of the players. Well, let's look at the recent history of big high-profile names coming into Major League Soccer, the Drogbas, the Villa, the Lampard. I would equivalent a Fernando Torres to a Lampard, which is a good name, a great career, records, and some great moments in Europe. But those moments were a few years ago. There's a buffer period since the last time he was effective, and the league might have moved on from those type of players. Look at who's having success this year, last year. Josef Martinez, young South American players, TAM players, deaf players that are coming in with not a name, but the will to make themselves a name, the will to make themselves a household name and a star, and they've chosen MLS to do so. You don't come into MLS as a star and continue to be if your name is not like a Villa or something. Now you come here and you become a star here. So I would actually be really shocked if anyone signs Torres. He's not worth $4 million. Look at what the players are paid right now. For him to be worth $4 million, his contribution is going to be needed to be around 15 to 20 goals a year. I don't think Torres can do that. I don't think Torres knows the league and how it is way more difficult on the pitch, off the pitch, than what he's used to, especially having played in England and in Spain, which are totally different markets, especially for travel, than North America. And Torres' name's recognition is not big enough to fill stadiums across the league like a Zlatan. So if Zlatan doesn't even have more than 1.5 million and is under a TAM contract, what does Torres think he's worth?
Yeah, look, the comparison, David Villa is obviously the one you're going to look at, and I think that's an apt player to look at. I do think that Fernando Torres could come to MLS and be successful. I do think that is among the scenarios that could happen, but I do think there's a risk there. It is a bit of a lottery to bring him over because he hasn't played a ton for Atleti over the last few years. He's been brought in off the bench. He's been brought in strategically. He sort of supplements that team, and he's done well in that role. But he hasn't been leaned on to be the main scorer for a while. And you look at all of his players since Liverpool, and that's kind of how he's been. So I'm not sure whether that is the type of player that you want to bring in at that level anymore in MLS. As I said when we were talking about Zlatan, it's a bit silly and a bit premature for MLS fans to look down their nose at guys like that because they are at a different level, even when they're older, right? Like when they're at their peak. If Zlatan's in MLS in his peak, like
that would be hilarious.
Come on. Like I like the league, I support the league, but let's be honest about where it is. And it's not, anywhere close to where Zlatan would be playing at his peak. So you have to kind of look at that. And when a guy's another level player, a top level player, world top 100 player, we'll say, then yeah, certainly they can still contribute when they're in their mid to late 30s. Early to mid 30s, we'll say. I'm not sure about late 30s unless they're Italian, because that's for some reason that works.
Italian or freaks of nature a la Zlatan. But no, and I have to agree with you. And not just that. When you're looking at Fernando Torres and how he was successful over the last decade, when he was successful, either at the international level or at the club level, the club was playing in a way that you might not see in MLS anyways. A false nine type of attitude, closer to tiki-taka. That's when you go back to 2010, 2012, when he had a great international career. But it's more than that. You don't find those tactics or those ideologies to the extent that he's used to in Major League Soccer. And if he's not put in the position where he can be that good, he's not going to find his marks, and I think it's going to be a flop. So no, I truly feel Torres is better fit for him and for what he wants, which is not to be at a competitive level that's really high. He wants a paycheck. He wants to slowly eke towards retirement. So less is more for him right now. Maybe China's a better place for you, buddy.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, for sure. I mean, no one's inside another person's head, but he doesn't strike me as someone who has a great drive to come to MLS and prove himself more, where Well, Villa, for I think one of the underspoken things about David Villa when he came over is that David Villa was always sort of a second thought throughout his career, right? Like he was such a brilliant player in Europe, but he wasn't ever really viewed as at the same level, even as a Torres, in terms of his visibility of his superstardom or whatever. And I think that he still had some hunger when he came over here, and that's so key to success when you're coming over at an older age, because you do need to have the drive to go through it. And we've seen guys like Gerrard that just simply did not have that drive, and they flopped because of it.
Oh yeah, forgot about him. Forgot about Steven Gerrard.
It's forgettable. His MLS time was forgettable. It's easy enough to forget him.
Let's just remind ourselves that no, he finished his career with Liverpool. All right, he never played a game outside of Liverpool. Because if I was him, that's what I would want my career to be finished with.
Yeah, well, he's back there now, so he's back where he belongs.
He's coaching Miller. He's coaching our Wonder Kid right now. So that's a positive. Duane, what else did you have for us today?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the International Challenge Cup. Or Champions Cup, whatever the hell they call it. I don't normally like talking about this thing because it's just that stupid friendly events that they have throughout the summer, and they like to call it a cup. But they're doing something interesting this summer. They're doing an addition on it, and there's a possibility that they're trying to plant the flag on another idea that I've been beating the drum up for a while, and that is the Women's Club World Cup. FIFA likes to really promote the Club World Cup to somewhat success in some parts of the world. Certainly, we're hearing a lot about it in this market right about now because they're 2 games away from it. But
I like the somewhat, and if you didn't hear it, Duane underlined the somewhat in the way he was talking. So it's an underlined somewhat, but yes. If you're in Morocco or Japan, this is a great tournament.
Yeah, there are places that get behind it, but I've always felt that where this idea, this concept has a lot of legs is on the women's side of the game, because there truly is a debate about where the best women's league in the world is. We don't know. Like, is the NWSL on par with PSG, with Manchester City Ladies? And we're going to find out a little bit this summer. It's going to be friendlies, and it's going to be during a window where the internationals aren't going to necessarily be available to North Carolina. But those 3 teams that I just mentioned, the North Carolina Courage of the NWSL, the Manchester City Ladies, and PSG women are going to be in an International Champions Cup sort of round-robin tournament. And that's not going to be anything other than friendlies. But I do think that it's an interesting concept that to see how it works, to see what interest there is, because if there is interest, I do think that is a natural place for FIFA to grow the game next, is to create an annual event for the champions of the women, the Champions League in Europe, the NWSL champions, get some kind of Asian representative in there and have a cup. And I think, to me, that has a potential to grab the attention and to truly step up to be the biggest trophy in women's club football, unlike the Club World Cup, which is not the biggest trophy in men's football. Yeah. I think it has that chance. And I think that this is sort of an interesting thing that's going to happen this summer, and I wonder whether the ICC is doing it to try and get in there first, so maybe they can create a private event. But if it is successful at all, I suspect FIFA would sweep in.
It would make sense too, because if you're looking at the feasibility of it, that's one of the reasons why on the men's side the Club World Cup is not a big tournament as it can be, is because some of the clubs don't want necessarily to go there and play 10 games in December, so they just go there and there's buys and there's complex equations to figure out who's going to play who and who's going to start in the semis and the quarters and the round of 18 or whatever. In the women's side, the fact that there's not as many clubs worldwide, you can find a way to have qualifiers and to have like an actual, maybe a 2-week-long tournament group stage, and like to actually have like a tournament in the World Cup for the clubs. And I think it has a lot of potential. I never thought about it until you mentioned it earlier today, and I've been thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, this could be awesome. Bring back the Comets, Laval Comet in the Club World Cup. I'll buy $1 for that.
Sure. Yeah. No. Right now, I think probably what you're looking at is that the European teams and the NWSL teams are probably a bit above the rest of the world, and that's certainly similar to the men's side. But I do think the gap's a little less, and it would be very interesting to create something where you'd get, like I said, an Asian representative in there. So you have 3, that would be 3. A host is 4, and the problem you get into is the areas like South America, and Africa that don't really have a women's foothold right now. Maybe this might encourage them to start create women's teams as well. So I would want to include them somehow, maybe a rest of the world spot for that last one. So I don't know. There's lots to think about there. And as I said, it's an idea that's been kicking around in women's circles for a while that I think really is overdue. And let's wish this success. I don't normally wish the ICC success because I want it to go away on the men's side. So that's the other thing, too. If this is successful, maybe they'll just plant their seed there and go that way and forget about bringing over the United half-assed reserves to play, Sporting Kansas City every year again.
Yeah, no, exactly. But they make money, and it's hard when you have a money-generating event to say no to it. So we'll see what happens. To finish the show, Duane, there's another news, new tidbit of news that came out in one of Steven Sandor's articles. Steven Sandor, friend of the show here. Once every 2 weeks, you could pretty much hear Steven on the show here. But he was talking about a second CCL spot for Canada. And if we're looking at the history of this competition, let's just put it 8 years, 7 years, Canada's clubs have always fared well and have taken this tournament seriously, invested money in how they present this tournament, both Montreal and Toronto, and both Montreal and Toronto. So they really give an importance to this tournament. And could a second spot be in the cards for the Canadian Soccer Association for the CONCACAF Champions League?
Based on pure coefficient, they should have a second spot already. Now, I have always been a pragmatist when it comes to this, and I recognize that the small size of the Voyageurs Cup tournament does not really warrant a second spot. I think it would I think it would actually hurt the tournament too, because if there were two spots in both finalists, it would kind of take a little edge out of the final, right?
50% of the competition makes it. You got 4 teams, 50% will make it. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so until it gets expanded. However, and this is where Stephen goes with this, once you start to bring the Canadian Premier League teams into this mix and you open it up into a true tournament, then I think maybe the justification when you look at the coefficient is there for Canada to get a second spot. Now, I think that second spot would likely be in the first round, the first round of 16.
I got an idea. Sorry to interrupt, Duane.
Sure.
In England, you know what they do?
Yeah.
Usually in your domestic league, you get a spot there for the Champions League, and in your cup situation, you get one too, right? That's what they do in the States too. How about we do this here? Voyageurs Cup, you get a spot. And to give prestige to the Canadian Premier League, the winner of the Canadian Premier League playoffs, if there's playoffs, or the season outright, gets a golden ticket too.
Yeah, that's probably the right way to do it. And it would be a bit ironic in the sense that I think you would give the Voyageurs Cup spot the full berth, and you would give the Canadian Premier League champion the I guess half berth, because you're going through the qualifying phase. But I think that based until the Canadian Premier League proves what its level is, that would be the fairest thing to do. And I think that would be a tremendous boon to the Canadian Premier League as well, to have that opportunity to measure itself against competition outside of its own league almost immediately. So I do think that this is something that Canadians should be advocating for now. I do think that it would provide, it's a guarantee that a Canadian Premier League team is going to be in the competition every year too. And as I said, until we know where that measure is, I'm fine with Canadian Premier League having to go play your, whatever, Harbor Fronts or your Joe Public. Joe Public's been
realistically
your teams from smaller parts, because then we find out, and a lot of people are very critical or very cynical, I should say, of what the Canadian Premier League level would be. So if they were to be put in that round of 16 that predates the full tournament, and they were successful in that, then they would shut people up too. So there's a win-win there, I think.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a discussion that we will continue, Duane and I and Keaton, on the Two Solitude Soccer podcast. For patrons only, $2 a month gives you access to this exclusive podcast. Duane, myself, and Keaton will take our vast experience of covering this beautiful game towards the Canadian Premier League with this special initiative that we have started. $2 a month gives you access to 4 shows a month, 1 weekly, usually by the end of the week, but it depends. It's all up to whenever we can record and get the content out. But make sure you stay tuned and you take the pledge $2 a month on patreon.com/sports podcasting network. As always, you can listen to our live shows on YouTube Monday to Friday. Make sure you click the subscribe button underneath my face right now, and make sure you click on the bell so you're notified whenever we go live. And as always, you can follow Duane at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. We'll be back tomorrow for Soccer Today with more football with a soccer perspective. And until then, as always, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.